At 39 years old, looking back, I can't believe how different my life was at 18. That's when I first crossed paths with Sofia, my ex. Back then, I was deep into the Latin Kings gang, having been involved since I was just 13, constantly in and out of trouble. Sofia, on the other hand, was the quintessential church girl. My grandmother used to drag me to Sunday Mass, and that's where I first laid eyes on her. For me, it was like an instant connection. Love at first sight. I tried to get my cousin, who was friends with her, to introduce us, but he flat out refused. He didn't want me getting near her, probably thinking I'd ruin her life. Have you ever met someone who made you want to be a better person? Someone who made you rethink your entire life? That was Sofia for me. When I found out she was at church nearly every day, I started hanging around the steps just to talk to her. I made it a point to walk her to and from church, and she made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely worthless. Eventually, we started dating, and for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely happy. I distanced myself from the gang life, got my GED, became a regular at church, and started thinking about a future that didn't involve crime. But just when things were looking up, I got dragged back into the old life. One day, I was at a store and bumped into an old enemy. He started talking trash, and I tried to walk away. I really did. But then, out of nowhere, he stabbed me in the shoulder blade. I lost it and ended up beating the hell out of him. I got arrested, and just like that, all the progress I'd made seemed to disappear. Sofia was furious. My grandmother wouldn't stop harping on my past mistakes, and my cousin smugly reminded me that he never believed I could change. Fortunately, my public defender saw that I was trying to turn my life around and by some miracle, got me out after a month in lockup. Even though Sofia was angry, she visited me almost every day. A month after my release, we found out we were going to have a baby. That news hit me hard. I didn't want my kid growing up with a dad who was either dead or in jail. So we eloped. I enrolled in a trade school to become a mechanic and worked my ass off to build a future for our family. When Emma was born, it was both the best and worst day of my life. Sofia had complications. She wouldn't stop bleeding and went into shock. They had to perform a double hysterectomy, and she was in the hospital for months. During that time, Emma became my entire world. I wanted to give her everything I never had. When Sofia finally came home, I promised her that our daughter would have a life far better than ours, and I meant it. I saved up enough money to move us to the suburbs and became a homeowner. Believe it or not, I even became a Girl Scout leader. I made sure Emma went to private school, learned how to defend herself, and tried to be the perfect husband. I never knew my own parents and lacked a positive male role model, so I had no idea what a healthy relationship looked like. That's not entirely true. I had TV dads as my role models, and I tried to imitate the kind of marriages they had on screen. As the years went by, I managed to own my own garage, while my cousin found God and became a pastor. My grandmother was still as much of a pain in the ass as ever, and my relationship with Sofia felt stronger than it had ever been. I kept in shape, making sure to maintain my prison body. But Emma grew to despise me. Since she turned 13, it was like a switch flipped, and she started to hate me. She didn't want me to hug her, rolled her eyes every time I said I love you, and ignored me whenever I asked about her day at school. It hurt me deeply, and Sofia noticed. She tried to reassure me, saying that Emma was just being a teenager and that she'd come around eventually. For 2 years, I tried to believe that. So when her quinceañera came around, I wanted it to be perfect. I got her everything she wanted, but she was still disrespectful. There was a moment when I almost snapped, ready to lay down the law, but instead, I turned to my cousin. I vented my frustrations and fears about being a lousy father. He told me to let it go and said a prayer for me. I decided to create a slideshow for the father-daughter dance and started gathering photos of us together. It was then that I realized I didn't have any recent pictures. She hadn't wanted to take any with me for a long time. The last time we were genuinely smiling together was on her 13th birthday, and those photos were on her broken tablet. Desperate to recover them, I took the tablet to a repair shop and didn't care about the cost. After a day and $300, it was fixed. I knew her passcode, but had never invaded her privacy. I just wanted those pictures. When I opened the tablet and looked through the gallery, there they were, my little girl, smiling and happy to be with me. It felt great to see those memories. But then, some instant messages popped up. It was Emma chatting with Sofia, complaining that she didn't want to dance with me at the quinceañera. That stung, but I brushed it off as typical teenage behavior, just like Sofia always said. But then Emma said something that destroyed me. She texted, asking why she had to do the father-daughter dance with me when I wasn't her father. It felt like my heart stopped. I got dizzy, my mouth went dry, and I had to sit down. Sofia responded, saying that I raised Emma, loved her, and that made me her father. But Emma replied, saying my cousin was her real father, and that she couldn't wait to turn 18 so she could tell me the truth and live with her real dad. She said she hated me and thanked God I wasn't her father. Sofia began cussing her out, saying it was a mistake for my cousin to tell Emma the truth 2 years ago. As their conversation continued, my anger boiled over. My wife had lied to me for 15 years, and my cousin, who I had confided in about my fears of being a bad father, had not only slept with my wife, but had me raise his child. The mixture of anger, sorrow, and grief was overwhelming. I wanted to scream, cry, and die all at once, if that even makes sense. I went to a dark place, and to prevent myself from doing anything rash, I told Sofia I needed to focus on work to cover the quinceañera expenses. Instead, I drove to Manhattan to see my old public defender, who was no longer a low-level attorney, but now had a high-end firm near Midtown East. I was surprised he remembered me, but apparently, I was his first case as a public defender. We sat down, and I laid it all out for him, giving him the tablet. As he turned it on, the messages just kept coming. This time, Emma was talking to my cousin, her real father. He was urging her to give me a chance, saying how I had always been there for her. But Emma countered that so had he. She even called him Poppy multiple times, and he responded warmly, calling her his little girl. We discussed my options, and when he asked what I wanted to do, I told him I wanted to go scorched earth. I wanted to burn it all down. He asked me several times if I was sure, and I nodded. I also told him everything had to be filed before the quinceañera in 2 weeks. We spent the next 12 hours planning meticulously. I followed his instructions to the letter. I secretly put my business up for sale, called the private school to cancel Emma's tuition for next year, closed the college accounts, and drained the savings I had put aside for her. I even prepared to list our house for sale online. No one suspected a thing. I did everything exactly as planned, except for one deviation on the day of the quinceañera. The event went off without a hitch. The whole family was there, and Emma was smiling, having fun. Sofia kept asking if I was okay, and I lied, saying I was. It was hard lying to her, especially since I'd never lied to her before. During those 2 weeks, every time I kissed her, held her, or made love to her, it was hard not to scream at her, not to hate her. She knowingly let me raise another man's child. She slept with my cousin, a man I saw as a brother, the godfather of my child, the best man at my elopement, and my confidant. So suppressing the rage was a challenge, to say the least. When it was time for the father-daughter dance, I called Emma to the center of the stage. She looked annoyed but walked over. As the music played, she smiled, and it tore me apart. I had longed to see that smile again, but now, I didn't want it. As we danced, a slideshow of pictures of us together played. Towards the end of the song, screenshots of her text messages with her mother and her biological father appeared on the screen. The reaction was immediate. Sofia looked like she'd seen a ghost. Emma just stared at the screen in shock, and my cousin looked terrified. Sofia rushed over, saying she could explain, but I told her I had already filed for divorce and that she could explain everything in court. She grabbed my arm, begging, but I pulled away. I told Emma that I had busted my ass to give her the world, and now she didn't deserve it. As I began to leave, I told my cousin that every time I saw him, I would knock him out. Then I did just that. The aftermath was brutal. Sofia and Emma went to my grandmother's apartment. Her family was shocked and disgusted by her actions. They wanted nothing to do with her. Her father, who had never liked me despite my efforts to turn my life around, actually apologized to me. It felt hollow, considering just days before, I was still the former piece of shit in his eyes. Now, suddenly, I was the perfect husband and father. My grandmother had the audacity to bring up the story of Abraham, telling me how he came back from battle 3 years later to find his wife had a 1-year-old child. whom he raised as his own. She suggested I should be like Abraham, so I told her to get the fuck out of my house. Sofia came a few days later, crying as soon as she saw me. She said it was an accident, explaining that when I was arrested, she was so angry and my cousin was there to console her. One thing led to another, and they had sex. She claimed it happened only once and that she had been faithful ever since. She even offered to take a lie detector test to prove it. So I asked her how long she'd known Emma wasn't mine. She cried harder, and her expression told me she'd known from day one. I asked her to leave. She wanted to go to counseling, insisting I was overreacting and that we could make it work. She argued it was in the past and I needed to get over it. She said I was Emma's father, regardless of everything. My temper flared. I must have repeated, "Get over it?" a dozen times, shouting while throwing her stuff out the door. I called her a lying whore, told her I didn't want to see her face again, and declared that the life I built was no longer hers. Then I shoved her out the door. Weeks passed and Sofia kept blowing up my phone. Emma never reached out once. Sofia was shocked to learn I sold my business, even more so when she found out about the open house for selling our home. She barged in, screaming at potential buyers to leave her house, begging me to seek help, and accusing me of ruining our marriage. She said I had no right to sell our home, the place where we raised our child. I told her the house was full of lies, a place where I unknowingly raised another man's child. I informed her that after the sale, she'd get half the proceeds, and ordered her to leave before I called the cops. It was a bluff. She could have played the victim, and I'd have been arrested, but she didn't. She complied. Shortly after, my cousin came to talk, and I knocked him out, dragged him outside, and closed the door. I refused mediation. Sofia wanted to reconcile. I wanted a divorce. My attorney filed for a fast-track divorce, and 3 months later, we were in the Nassau County Courthouse. During that time, I spoke to almost no one. I had read horror stories about the court system, especially in divorce cases, but my experience wasn't like that. The judge, a fair woman, handled everything professionally. Lawyer tried to bring up my past with the gang, as if that made me a bad husband or father, but my attorney shut it down, and the judge reprimanded her lawyer for trying to shame someone who turned their life around. My attorney presented all the evidence and offered a lump sum alimony payment from the pending sales of the house and business. Initially, Sofia kept asking me to reconsider. I ignored her. When she realized I wouldn't budge, she agreed. The real surprise came with the child support issue. My attorney presented text messages between Emma and Sofia, showing that Emma knew I wasn't her father and expressed relief at not having to live a lie. Sofia was caught off guard. My attorney then filed a motion to have my name removed from Emma's birth certificate and to absolve me of child support, arguing that my cousin was the biological father. Sofia was shocked, pleading with me not to do this to Emma, insisting I was her father because I raised her. It may sound pathetic, but if Emma hadn't acted the way she did, I might have agreed. There were moments I considered reaching out, trying to make it work, but then I'd read those text messages again, and it strengthened my resolve. To this day, I don't know what hurts more, being betrayed by the woman I thought was the love of my life, or having a child I tried to give the world to discard me like trash. The judge read through the text messages carefully. In the end, she ruled in my favor. I was not financially responsible for Emma, and my name could be removed. My attorney also filed a motion to pursue my cousin for child support and sue him for the money I spent raising Emma, citing fraud for knowingly allowing me to raise his daughter without offering any financial support. It was a long shot, but the judge agreed. I didn't look at Sofia when the judge made her decision. I didn't listen as I left the courthouse, even as I heard her crying, saying she cheated only once and had been faithful since. I just didn't care anymore. A few weeks later, Sofia called, shocked that I'd stopped payments for Emma's private school and activities. I told her to call her baby daddy and hung up. Even Emma called, the first time since this ordeal started. She cried about having to go to public school, moving back to the old neighborhood, and how scared she was. She said she wanted us to be a family again. I told her to go to her real father, the man she truly wanted. I yelled at her, reminding her that she knew for years and that I read all the messages. She was thankful a hoodlum like me wasn't her father, even though I hadn't been one since I found out I was going to be a father. I hung up on her after that. I thought about ending it countless times, ending my cousin, even ending myself. But instead, I made him pay. He had to give me $500,000, all mine. Not a cent for my ex, thanks to her agreeing to a lump sum in the divorce settlement. I didn't care that the money came from the church. I was hurting. I left New York shortly after, heading to Idaho, as far away as I could get. I chose a random state and city and left. I opened a new shop, got a house, but for 2 years, I struggled with trust issues. For 2 years, I saw a therapist, went to anger management, and vented my frustrations in rage rooms. It was tough. Then I found myself returning to church, and ironically, that's where I met my fiancée. Claire was wonderful. She had just turned 30, and we hit it off. I told her everything that had happened to me and explained that I had trust issues. She understood. A year later, she told me I was going to be a dad and insisted we do a DNA test just to give me peace of mind. I had forgotten what it felt like to be happy again, and when my son was born, I was overjoyed. I called my grandmother for the first time in years. She cried, and when I told her about my son, she insisted I come to New York so she could meet her great-grandchild, guilt-tripping me by saying she was 90 and would like to see me one more time. I agreed. We flew to New York, rented a car, and drove to Bushwick. The thing about the hood is, you only need to see one person from your past, and the whole neighborhood knows you're back. My grandmother saw my son, met my fiancée, and made an offhand comment in Spanish about her being white. I just nodded and smiled. We planned to spend a week doing the tourist thing, Claire's first time in the Big Apple, and I wanted it to be special. But as usual, nothing went as planned. First, my ex shouted my name from downstairs. I looked out the window, surprised at how much weight she'd gained. My grandmother told me in Spanish to talk to her, and Claire agreed. I went downstairs, and we stood in awkward silence for a minute. Then all the anger came flooding back. Sofia told me I looked good and admitted she looked like shit. She said she missed me and claimed she hadn't been with another man since the divorce. I ignored her. Then she had the audacity to tell me I was a grandfather. I stared at her in disbelief. Apparently, Emma got with a decent guy and got pregnant at 18. Her baby daddy joined the Marines to support them, while her biological father wanted nothing to do with her. He just pays child support and refuses to acknowledge her. He's no longer a pastor and is working at the Banco Popular 2 blocks away. Sofia then told me that Emma named the baby after me, and I couldn't stand looking at her. Sofia wanted me to wait because Emma was on her way over, but I just walked away. I went back to my grandmother's apartment, and I didn't have to say anything to Claire. She just knew. We left. As we got into the elevator, I told her what had happened, and she smiled, reassuring me that everything would be all right. The look on face when we left the building, she stared at my fiancée like she was the other woman. Without missing a beat, Claire introduced my son to her. I would like you to meet his biological child, she said. It was a knife twist, but she knew my pain. Sofia tried to stop me from leaving, telling me that Emma felt bad about what she had done. Claire encouraged me to make amends, so I reluctantly gave Sofia my number so Emma could call me. Then we left. At a red light, I saw my cousin by the Cucci Frito stand. I don't know what came over me, but I got out of the car, ran up to him, and beat the shit out of him. Claire was screaming, telling me to stop, and when our eyes locked, I could see the fear in hers. I spat on him and walked away. Now, I'm back home, working, being a dad, and a good fiancé to a beautiful woman. Yet since returning to New York, when I'm alone with my thoughts, the anger resurfaces. Emma did text me with a picture of her smiling with her son, telling me she was sorry for what she did. But I'm not sure if she's sorry because she missed me or because the man she wanted to be her father turned out to be someone else entirely. I'm confused and scared to reach out to her. I want to get past this. I want to move on. My family was everything to me, and my daughter was my world. Even after all these years, it still hurts, and it still makes me angry. But I know I need to move on. It's hard. I want to reach out to Emma, but I'm so scared. People tell me to let her back in, but all I can think about are those text messages and the lies, the constant lies. I need help, and my usual methods aren't working. Emma tried calling me several times, but I kept staring at my phone without answering. I wanted to, but all I could think about were those messages, what she said to her mother, her real father, her friends. So I ignored the calls. Eventually I listened to her voicemail. She sounded cheerful, briefly apologized for her actions, but to me it didn't sound sincere, just passive. Maybe I'm overthinking it. She mentioned her son, her fiancé, and asked me to call her back. Simple requests, yet they infuriated me. My grandmother and my fiancé keep telling me to give Emma a chance. But when I asked my grandmother if Emma or Sofia ever asked about me in the 4 years I was gone, she said only Sofia did. Constantly. Emma never did. In my twisted mind, it feels like Emma wants me back in her life just to secure her child's future. Or maybe she wants to use me in some way. That thought makes me so angry. Even Sofia has been trying to call me constantly. I'm even considering changing my number. I spent most of Father's Day at the gym, taking out my frustrations on the heavy bag. I have an appointment today with an anger management group. Maybe they can offer an outside perspective. If this ever gets published by the mods, I'd appreciate your opinion as well. For now, I'm just trying to figure this out on my own. I sent a brief email to Emma asking, "What do you want?" I didn't expect the multi-paragraph response that followed. She started by profusely apologizing for her past behavior. She said that when she discovered I wasn't her biological father, she felt lost and angry. She confronted her mother, who cried and begged her not to tell me. Feeling adrift, she began talking more with my cousin, her biological father. He shared details about my violent past, things I had kept hidden from her, which only fueled her anger. The more time she spent with him, the more she distanced herself from me. Despite feeling guilty at times, my cousin reinforced her negative feelings towards me. On the day of the quinceañera, she said that while we were dancing, she realized how much I loved her and how foolish she had been. Then the messages appeared on the screen. In the days following, she was advised by Sofia's family to give me space and not to contact me. She watched her family fall apart and felt powerless to fix it. Her grandfather told her that I loved her and raised her, despite the messages she saw, and she believed him. During the divorce, her mother fell into a dark place, barely eating and existing in isolation. When Emma found out my name was removed from her birth certificate, she had a panic attack. Her mother told her they would have to move back to Brooklyn, and when Emma asked about her life in school, her mother said, "That was the life your father gave you, and he's not your father anymore." Emma called me, begged for a chance, and I cursed her out and hung up. She cried for days. She tried reaching out to my cousin, who largely ignored her, and even went to the church where he told her to leave, calling her a mistake. Her mother refused to talk to her, locked herself in her room, and when they did speak, blamed Emma for losing me. Her grandfather had to confront her mother, pointing out that it was her infidelity that caused the loss of my love. After that, Emma barely stayed home and met her future fiancé at the corner bodega. They began talking, and eventually she ended up pregnant. Her grandfather was furious, but when her fiancé insisted on marrying her, the situation eased. Emma described her pregnancy as a blessing in disguise. Her mother started talking to her again and began joining her for doctor visits. She graduated high school a month before giving birth, and her fiancé joined the Marines. He wanted to elope, but Emma preferred a wedding. Her fiancé, whose own father was absent, chose to name their son after me, as a tribute to a name he felt connected to despite the circumstances. When Emma heard I was in town, she rushed to my grandmother's apartment, got a speeding ticket on the way, and arrived late. She wanted to apologize and introduce me to her son, but she was devastated when she found out I had moved. Her mother was upset to see that I had moved on and had a son, and Emma was happy to learn she had a little brother. Her mother's depression grew deeper. After reading her email, I called Sofia to confirm if what Emma said was true. Sofia admitted it, and initially I yelled at her, but her crying broke my resolve. I told her to move on and find someone else, but she insisted that I was her husband and would always be. That broke my heart a little. I then asked my grandmother to visit my cousin so I could speak with him. The second he heard my voice, he broke down and begged for forgiveness. I asked him why he hadn't been a father to Emma and why he had poisoned her against me. He admitted it was out of envy. He was in love with Sofia, and when I was arrested, he consoled her, manipulated her, and though their time together was brief, she realized what was happening and pushed him away. But he had already impregnated her. When Emma became pregnant, they both knew the baby was his. They kept it a secret, and Sofia viewed her double hysterectomy as divine retribution for her infidelity. When Emma turned 13, my cousin, still drunk with envy, wanted to destroy my life and succeeded. I told him that when we meet again in hell, I'd be his eternal torturer, and hung up. Claire was there for me, offering support and reminding me that everything would be okay. Emma and I have continued to communicate via email. I spoke with her on the 4th of July, and she spent over an hour crying while talking to me. I even spoke with her fiancé, who asked for my permission to marry her. I found it both amusing and honorable. My wedding is next month, and Claire wants me to invite Emma. Emma has also asked if I could give her away at her wedding in November. My future father-in-law told me he couldn't fully grasp my situation but respected the path I took because it brought happiness to his daughter and a family that meant a lot to him. His words made me laugh. He also advised me to let go of the anger and start forgiving, though never forgetting. He's right. So we've invited Emma to my wedding and even offered to pay for her plane ticket. Her fiancé said he'd work off the cost at my garage when they arrive. I kind of like him. As for giving Emma away at her wedding, I'm not sure yet. I'll see how things go at my wedding first. Thank you all for the advice and the support. Your input has been invaluable. I'll update if anything changes, but for now, I need to focus on getting things ready for my wedding next month. Leading up to the wedding, I was on edge. Claire was the happiest I've ever seen her, and my in-laws were overwhelmed by the number of guests attending. It felt like the whole town had shown up. Meanwhile, I was an hour and a half away in Boise, anxiously waiting for Emma and her family to arrive at the airport. In the days before their visit, Emma and I spoke often. She mostly cried and apologized while I listened. When she couldn't speak anymore, I'd chat with her fiancé John, who turned out to be down-to-earth and easy to talk to. When their plane finally landed, I was terrified, not of seeing Emma, but of my own anger. I feared I might lose my temper. The moment she saw me at the terminal, she ran to me, crying. For a split second, I saw my daughter at 7 years old. It was surreal. She screamed, "Daddy," and clung to me as if I might disappear. Her crying was so intense it drew the attention of everyone around us. She kept repeating how sorry she was and begged for forgiveness. I held her for over 15 minutes, and it took both her fiancé and me to gently convince her to let go. After she composed herself, John introduced himself properly, and then they introduced me to their son. I won't lie, I cried holding the baby. Emma's resemblance to her mother at 19 was striking, which made me think of Sofia. During the drive home, we talked about John's boot camp experiences, his plans to make a career out of the Marines, and Emma's online college studies in accounting. When we arrived at my house, Claire and her family had prepared a feast. Claire had gone all out with Spanish dishes, wanting to make a good impression. She and Emma hit it off immediately. Every few minutes, Emma would come over to give me a quick hug before returning to Claire. I spent time holding my son and my grandson. While Claire introduced Emma to her family, I took the babies to bed and went outside for some fresh air. John was standing at the edge of the yard, gazing at the bison roaming around. I considered giving him the dad talk, but it didn't seem appropriate. Instead, I asked him how he liked the view, and he was in awe. Having lived in the city most of his life, he was fascinated by the open spaces. After a moment, he looked at me and told me how much Emma regretted her actions. "I've been with your daughter for 3 years, and not a day goes by that she doesn't mention how much she misses you and regrets what happened." That single sentence has replayed in my mind ever since. John, at only 19, displayed a maturity beyond his years, which made me appreciate him even more. I could relate to his rough upbringing. The next day, Emma practically jumped into the car with the baby when I headed to the shop. John reassured her that it was okay to enjoy herself. Emma looked like she might hyperventilate from anxiety, so I told her we'd work a half day and then spend the rest of the day together. As we drove, I realized how traumatized she was. John explained that Emma had severe abandonment issues, constantly fearing he might leave her despite his reassurances. She would call him frequently, was clingy at times, and initially struggled to be herself in fear of their relationship ending. John understood my role in her trauma, but he didn't blame me. John was a terrible mechanic. He didn't know anything about cars. So I had him help out around the shop to work off the plane tickets. We closed early, and when we got home, Emma rushed to me again, visibly distressed. I told her I'd be back and left her with John. When I walked inside, Claire told me that Emma needed reassurance that everything would be fine and that I wouldn't leave her again. Claire grabbed my hands and reminded me that Emma was hurting and needed her father. Over the next few days, I spent all my time reconnecting with Emma. I took her to my in-laws' ranch, showed her the bison and elk, and took her on a hike. 2 days before the wedding, I apologized for leaving and for my past actions, but Emma didn't want to hear it. She insisted that there was nothing I needed to apologize for, acknowledging that she was the reason everything fell apart. I told her it wasn't her fault, that I was the one who should apologize for my actions. We both cried and embraced, sharing a heartfelt moment. On the day of my wedding, Emma seemed genuinely happy. Claire decided at the last minute to make her a bridesmaid and John a groomsman. The wedding was beautiful. During the reception, I asked the DJ to play the song from Emma's quinceanera and danced with her. She cried throughout the dance, holding on to me tightly. It was one of the happiest moments I've had in a long time. I let Emma and her fiancé stay at my house while Claire and I went to Hawaii for our honeymoon. When we returned, Emma was joyful and hugged us warmly. John mentioned he would be stationed at Camp Dwyer in Afghanistan and asked if Emma could stay nearby. He offered to pay for an apartment near us until he could buy a house. I agreed, and they returned to the city a few days ago. It's been an eventful time. Emma's wedding is in November, and John will be leaving in December. John sent what amounts to a year's rent for a townhouse community 3 miles from my house. Claire suggested we put a double-wide trailer on our property for Emma to save money for a house when John returns. Sofia has been bombarding me with messages, clearly unhappy about Emma moving nearby. For now, my focus is on my family and mending my relationship with my daughter.